I'll always defend band directors because it's a job where how could you possibly know all the instruments?
Hmm.
And here we are struggling to learn all these just percussion instruments, and they have to do all the wind instruments and many times stringed instruments, and
Hmm.
it's and they get a really good pedagogy class, I think, in all the universities. But once you take that class, you're going to remember some of it. And if you use some of it, it'll come back and you're going to forget some of it. So you just have to be constantly, re-educate yourself and so on. And of course, today with YouTube and all the major manufacturers all have very short and succinct videos demonstrating things at the highest professional level. So, it's a good thing to assign your kids. Oh, let's go listen and, go watch 10 YouTubes today and tell me what you watched.
Yeah, going down the YouTube rabbit hole is something I do in private lessons and
Yes.
percussion classes. I'll while they're setting up, or we'll actually take sometimes if they're already set up, I'll take like just specific time to do it. It's really important. It can seem like a waste of time to watch 5 minutes of a video in a 30-minute lesson, but it's worth it.
It really is. And, that's why I every afternoon I am with YouTube and I'm watching these wonderful podcasts by Samuel Andreoff and listening to everybody under the sun. And it's really educational. Makes me a better musician just by doing that kind of thing all the time. So it's wonderful. And back to the YouTube videos, we can mention, Grover Pro, if you want to know how to play triangle, if you want to get some basic skills on tambourine or bass drum, he's got it on his website, just groverpro.com. Zildjian has what they call Zildjian University or something, with just dozens and dozens of ways of how people play cymbals and so on. So it's just an unbelievable asset that we didn't have when we were growing up. I didn't even know what a computer was when I was in school, which kind of
Sure.
dates me, but that's true.
Sure. So, hey, what a wonderful segue to talk about your early schooling and what your early music education was like.
Okay. Well, I started in a fifth grade band and I was in a small school in a small town in northeastern Ohio, about 35 miles east of Cleveland, called Perry, Ohio. My band director name was Mr. Custer, and he was enthusiastic and passionate and was a wonderful role model. I really took to drums, just loved it right off the bat. And my parents got me a private teacher for a few years. And so I knew probably from sixth or seventh grade that I was going to be a musician. That's all I was interested in.
How early in the day do you think about drums, Bob?
Oh, like I think if you ask my wife, it would probably be 24 hours a day, so.
Same here. I mean, seriously, I
Yeah.
wake up and it's one of the first things I think about.
Yep. Yeah. Well, my mornings, I get up, I read the paper, I go out and run, which is supposed to keep me young. And then I race to the studio and practice a couple hours every morning. There's an old theater in downtown Tampa called the Springs Theater. And so it used to be a recording studio, and then the pandemic hit and studio went dead. So I rent some of the space in there and have most of my instruments and most of my library there. And so I go down there every morning, usually come home for lunch.
How far away did you say that was from your house?
Oh, about 20, 30 minutes drive, about 20 minutes.
Do you keep percussion gear at your house too? So you have stuff in
Well,
both
yeah, I
places?
have stuff. Yeah, I have stuff in both places. Sure. Yeah.
I remember seeing your arsenal at USF. I mean, how many
Yeah.
timpani do you have, if you had to guess?
How many do I have? I have six timpani in the Springs Theater, and I have a couple of others too. So I have about eight timpani. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you still have those big metal, like, art pieces that were functional art?
I do. Aren't they beautiful? Yes.
Yeah.
They were made by a man named John Stannard, who had this company, HammerX. And before HammerX, he had a company where he made wind chimes and so on that were very famous. I'm trying to remember the name of that now, but he's a really terrific sound maker, just terrific instrument inventor. So he's in outside of Dunedin and Largo and that area. And and I think still experiments around, but he sold his company a few years back. So I've got a lot of prototypes of his that were just magnificent.
Yeah, you've
Graven,
got a
we're
lot
going to
of.
do Graven, you're going to do the Cage first construction in metal. I've got the best metals for that.
Do you ever rent them out for people playing that?
Oh, I've loaned them out anytime. Sure. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So you had mentioned that you really took to percussion. Do you have any idea what drew you in about the drums? Did you know before band had started that you liked the drums?
Well, I like to say I probably took up drums because I was a hyperactive kid that banged on everything. So that's most likely what attracted me to drums. But yeah, it was drums at first. But after drums, I really got interested in piano and then mallet percussion and that kind of thing. So I really grew in all areas and became less of a drummer and more of a musician, if that's not a fair thing to say in one sense, because there are very musical drummers, but you know what I mean.
Well, it's really funny you say that because I had Bill Bachman. Do you know who Bill Bachman is?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I had Bill Bachman on the show, and I brought that up with him because I remember my high school director kind of barking that sort of thing at me,
Okay.
like, "Oh, you
Yeah.
can be a drummer or a musician." And I remember thinking then, well, I think Max Roach is a musician.
Oh, no
And
kidding. Yeah.
Bill Bachman mentioned that Chick Corea said that Steve Gadd was his favorite musician, not drummer, musician he's ever played with.
Well, I would agree with that. They don't come more musical than Steve Gadd or more imaginative.
Right. Right.
Yeah. It's just so natural and such a joy to watch him play. Everything is so effortless. Yeah. There's been many times when I'm teaching, when I say, go watch some Steve Gadd videos and you'll understand what I mean by legato. You'll understand how to play the instrument by watching Gadd because nobody does it more naturally.
Have you checked out his book, the Rudiment one, the Gaddiments,
Yes.
I think it's called.
Yeah. 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 It's
A
wonderful.
lot of funky stuff in there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, I understand the concept there. Being a percussionist is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
But there's, and here's a marimba right here, but there's a lot of like discounting of the drum set, I think, by non-percussionists at least.
Yeah. It's a hard instrument and it's hard for a percussionist, to be more than functional on drum set. If you're a good musician, you can get by. So again, it's that music thing where the music is much more important than the technique in many styles or many instances. Certainly, you still have to have the technique. But, if you can teach yourself to listen, which really is, something that we all teach our students. So you have to listen to get the styles. Kind of
Yeah.
hard to get it out of a book. You really need to listen, whether it's Bach or whether it's jazz or rock and roll. It's really important that time is spent just listening with good headphones.
Yeah, absolutely. What have you listened to today?
What have I listened to today? Nothing yet. I went in and practiced, but I've been listening to a lot of things. Last night, I listened to the Sylvia Gulbenkian, what's her name? It's a work for 4 percussion soloists and orchestra, Gulbenkian. And, it was featuring there's lots of good percussion groups. I love the percussions of Strasbourg in France. There's just a whole historical basis there. And to me, the greatest composers, starting with the second half of the 20th century, have written for them. So their literature is really substantial. So I spend a lot of time listening to all of their things. There's a 15 CD set that came out at their 50th anniversary that has everything. The Xenakis works were written for them and several other really important pieces. So that's where I start. So that was the group that was featured in the last listening session I had last evening.
Yeah, very different stuff than I'm listening to. I listened to Night Train today, the Oscar Peterson album.
Oh,
so many of those tempos are so slow. I mean, oh my gosh.
Well, he was a master. I studied with Ed Thigpen.
No, you didn't.
I got my undergrad degree from Los Angeles. In LA, you can study with everybody. So I used to go out to Ed Thigpen's house and study with him probably for about a year or so. Again, it's a sweet, wonderful man. Moved to Europe so he could continue playing jazz. It's a little hard to make a living in the United States after the trio split up. But yeah, I go out to Ed's house and work on brushes with him. And, he'd put up CDs on and I'd put his headphones on and play along with his LPs at that time. They weren't CDs yet. And so, yeah, I had many, many fun times with Ed Thigpen.
I'm geeking out. That's really cool, man. What kind of approach did he have for like that extreme slow, that ding, jack, ding? Did he give you any particular patterns that you can think of, or maybe not patterns, but concepts?
The concept was, Bob, watch the time. Because we all want to rush on that. So yeah, we'd have to stop. Bob, I think you're rushing that. Come on, Bob. Okay. So that was pretty much how we taught. And yeah, so he was the beginning of a long thing, us drummers and trying to keep time.
Yeah. I notice just how stable the hi-hat is. He doesn't play around too much on that album, at least. It's a lot of.
Yeah. He's always a timekeeper first. Yeah. Yeah.
And just everything is like, he doesn't mince words, he chooses his words wisely when he's playing. That attracts me a lot, just someone who really swings like that.
Yep. He's wonderful with that.
And he
he never got in the way of the music.
Oh, absolutely. And he probably had the smoothest brush to sticks or sticks to brushes like technique you could ever find.
He was great at switching back and forth. Absolutely. And of course, his brush technique was his calling card too.
Mm-hmm. Do you have the book where you open it up and it's patterns?
Yeah.
That was my birthday present last year. It was great to bring into the theater,
Yeah.
You have that downtime. So, all right, let's get a little question from the list here. As somebody on the other side of an audition, do you have any auditionees that stuck out to you? And if so, could you place what stuck out about that?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And again, we've talked about time. That's the first thing you want to see. Can they demonstrate something, and how is their overall sense of timing? And so that was always important to me. If I were getting a high school student to come into the university, I think technique is pretty easy to teach, frankly. I think the hard thing to teach is musicality. The hard thing to teach is aesthetics, trying to get them to listen to the right thing and appreciate it, and so on. And one thing that I always ask them to do is, if they tuned the timpani, I didn't have to hear them sing. But if I questioned how their tuning was, I'd always say, hey, can you sing Mary Had a Little Lamb? Can you sing Happy Birthday for me? Or something, just so I could get an idea of where their sense of pitch was. So to me, that was almost more important than whether they had technique.
Have you ever taken someone who didn't necessarily sing the best or have great time, but you just had a feeling about them?
Oh, absolutely. And usually they could develop it. I think there's very, very few people who can't learn to hear. And there's very few people who, I've had students rush so bad when they were freshmen, I'd say, well, you better play in that piece over there, because they weren't able to play in an ensemble without rushing so bad. And then by the time they're seniors, they could keep fairly steady time, if not very good time, and go on to professional careers. And I remember one kid in particular, probably studied with me 40 years ago. And, your typical freshman, time wasn't there. And somehow he got a job in a band that was playing at a club. And the leader of the band had him play with a drum machine. So he was playing with the drum machine 2 or 3 nights a week, 3-4 hours a night. That kid's time just went crazy good after being very, very suspect and mediocre. So metronomes do work, and that really, and a lot of kids' time, it's just because they don't have the coordination yet or they don't understand the style. So it's kind of all three of them are related together. Once you understand that style, and once you have some basic technique, the time's going to get better pretty quick as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So everything's related.
And one of the things I'll do with my students or in classes is I'll have them make a list of reasons you might drag and then a
Mhm.
list of reasons you might rush. And there's a lot of things happening before, oh, you have bad time. Like you've mentioned the coordination thing, that slows people down all the time, and speaking from personal experience, my time got a little
Oh,
better
absolutely.
when my coordination got a little better.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, if I'm playing with a great bass player, all of a sudden I'm a pretty good drummer. If I'm playing with a weaker bass player, I get to be a pretty bad drummer pretty quick. If I'm playing with a group of musicians that are sight reading a book that's really hard, drums might not be quite as steady in their ears. Once they get to know those charts, maybe they're not going to be dragging the drummer down. So, it is an interrelated type of thing.
You mentioned you're playing in a reading band. Do
Yeah.
they drag or is it a pretty solid
Oh,
band?
well, I'll be politically correct and say it's a reading band. So anything
Yeah.
can happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're all in the same boat.
Yeah,
And
well, the reason I ask that is you're gonna laugh. I was doing one of those rehearsals, and the bass player, I swear to you, even though I won't say names or anything, but he's a very respected bass player here in Orlando. He's a little older and is almost completely deaf now. So
sounds like me.
between
Yeah.
well, but between him and the other 30 people who were all in their mid 90s, I mean, there was no chance for me.
Yeah. That's
No
right.
chance at all,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have mattered if it was Buddy Rich,
Yeah. Yeah.
and for the band directors listening, hopefully that's a lesson in that if your big band is dragging, it could be the drummer, but it might not be because a lot of times you'll take the drummer out and the same time tempo
They'll
problems
drag
still happen.
worse. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Directors. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So,
I, I wish I was blessed with perfect time myself, but it's a community thing with the band. If you want to keep the time up, it's rarely just one person's fault.
mhm, mhm. So I think everybody kind of has like a weakness that they struggle with, maybe even lifelong. Mine is definitely timing. Some people can't get their hands together for a long time. Some people,
Oh yeah.
whenever. What is your weakness that you had to struggle with, at least maybe in your formative years?
Oh, I rushed like crazy.
You're a
Yeah.
rusher.
Yeah. I was a rusher.
I'm a
No.
dragger, so you're lucky.
Yeah.
I'm a dragger.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
worse. It's infinitely worse.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost like pitch, where people can generally tell if you're flat a lot easier than if you're a little
Yeah.
bit sharp.
Yeah.
The rushing is usually forgivable by the band.
Yeah. But again, if you play long enough and your time will get better. There's no question about it. And it has to be good for you to be a working musician.
Hmm.
It really does. So that's a critical thing. But, person has perfect pitch. I can envy them. If a person has perfect time. Again, it's a very rare kind of a thing.
Do you think anybody that you've known has had perfect time?
Well, I've had some that have had very good times. No question about that. Yeah.
I think
And
I
some
think
with
Buddy
perfect pitch.
I think Buddy Rich had perfect time, like legitimately.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard people say that he rushed too on certain things. So Steve Gadd has got awfully good time. Maybe Shelly Manne, was an idol of mine in the early days and also just had such great time. So they're out there. Yeah.
Shelly Man is criminally underrated.
Oh, yeah. He was certainly a master. Passed away a little too young.
How old was he?
Oh, I don't think he was 60 yet, but he was pretty young. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, earlier you mentioned all the YouTube channels with, you mentioned Zildjian University and all the Big First resources. Are there any other resources that you think a band director should have? So maybe books or,
I know. I think it's the Army Band. Let's see if I have it here. Oh, yeah. Let me see if I can put this up here. This is called The Complete Percussionist. And this is the United States Army Field Band. That's a great DVD. And it's probably online as well. You could probably find it on YouTube without purchasing that. Yamaha did a concert percussion series years ago that featured Tony Cirone and Cloyd Duff. That's another excellent example for you there. Gary Cook's book is very comprehensive. It's called Teaching Percussion. And so that's one of the Bibles that can let you know almost anything. I wrote a text several years ago called Percussion for Musicians that has a lot of etudes in it. It's different than the cookbook in that sense, but just has very minimal instruction on how to get things done quick. So there's no shortage of research sources for any of us today. There's just so much. It's just an information explosion, as you well know.
Yeah, maybe that's a bad thing in some ways too.
Well, yeah, there's just more than any one person could possibly comprehend. That's for sure. But it does keep us learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It can be a little overwhelming sometimes, though.
It is, sure. Yeah.
Paralysis through analysis. Like, where do I even start with some of this stuff? But
absolutely.
Yeah, all of those resources you mentioned are wonderful. The Army Band video is on YouTube.
That's right.
Yeah. Last I checked, it was on YouTube.
Yeah. And I think the Cloyd Duff and Cirone with the Yamaha concert percussion series is as well.
Mm-hmm. If at least in shorter clips. I think the whole thing is there, though.
It may be, yeah. So, yeah, all you got to do is say concert bass drum in YouTube, and I think you'll get a couple dozen people showing you how to play the drum correctly. So triangle, same thing. You can go to the Grover website because he makes triangles. Tambourine, back again to the Grover website. He's got so many excellent videos.
On the concert bass drum, I have a question for you about your approach to it. Do you pull the sound out, or do you play it more like you play the snare drum?
I was always taught by Cirone. He'd always say, Bob, play off the drum. Okay, so it's not unlike the way I maybe would play mallets or a snare drum or anything else. I'm just going to use that natural rebound and let it come off. I'm not going to try to draw the sound out. If it's too tight, you'll get a thin sound. Make sure that the grip is not overly too tight with your students. Then for general playing, just play off the center area of the head. And a lot of people, maybe the bass drum should be tuned as low as possible without sounding flabby. And the two heads, you can tune the beating head a little looser than the vibrating head. The last thing you want to do is set up a pitch. So that would be the quick lesson on bass drum.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's great. I personally, I find this to be a pet peeve. This circular whippy thing, because what if you're playing Night on Bald Mountain or something? How in the world?
Yeah. Yes.
But band directors sometimes will,
and I guess there's nothing wrong with that. I still, when I pull off, I use more distance than a lot of people would. I just, it feels comfortable in my hand. And so some people would say, why is he playing it so far off the drum? Well, it sounds good to me. And, so I get to be my own judge unless the boss tells me to do it differently.
Yeah. And, just to be clear, I'm not referring to pulling away from the drum at like in an upstroke, but just to
you're talking about the circular kind of motion. Yeah.
The almost like old school Civil War marching band drummy kind of thing is what it reminds me of.
And I think it works on a marching drum because you can still do it direct. But once you get rid of that direct and you start slicing, your sound's going to be thin.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So when you were younger and first started your drum lessons, do you remember what kind of method, like what books that your teacher was using for you? And then as you progress as a player, how did your practice progress? And what different books were you getting into?
Well, going back to elementary school and junior high school, I think it would have been Haskell Harr's books. That may have been all that was available at that time, too. And then from there, we went through all the Ludwig drummer books. Ludwig had, the NARD books that they published. And then there's a couple of other books of solos similar to NARD. And after that, it would have been the Pratt solos. So I remember playing the Pratt solos when I was in high school for solo and ensemble. And probably some Podemsky and certainly some Charlie Wilcoxon. I met Charlie Wilcoxon was outside of Cleveland when I was younger. So I went through all the Wilcoxon books. I didn't study with him, but I met him a couple times. And for mallets, the first one I probably remember would be the Goldenberg's Modern School for Xylophone, Marimba, and Vibes. And, that was my undergraduate text, along with some Bach and probably some Musser etudes. Yeah.
There.
It's hard to beat. And it's still a great book. It's still very valid today.
Oh, agree completely, especially, just for the excerpts and the etudes. Yeah. Man, I want to go back to the Nard book that you mentioned. I was such an arrogant high schooler that I had that book and I looked at it and said, these are easy. There's only two kinds of solos in this book, 6/8 or 2/4, and that's it. They're all the same solo.
Yeah.
And now, years and years later, I'd put a metronome on and try to get through. Some of those are really brutal.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't believe stuff like that was being written back then.
Well, Steve Gadd's drumming is often based on all of those early Army 2/4 military kinds of solos. And so it's a basic pedagogy. So I think it's still a very valid part of the teaching situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it shows you what the point of learning all those rudiments are.
Yeah. And the Pratt solos are still an excellent choice, even for a concert style player, for solo and ensemble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the older rudiment stuff is, if you just play it soft enough, it really applies to the other side of the snare drumming world,
It does, yeah.
These days with all, I don't know if you've seen any transcriptions of like modern DCI snare lines, but it looks,
Sure.
it looks like math.
Yeah.
Like every beat is some sort of polyrhythmic thing.
Well, things have become so specialized today in that, where snare drummers, can wow you. And so it's interesting how the percussion world is growing up.
Did you do marching band or anything when you were in high school?
I did marching band in high school. I marched 1 year of college. Then I got drafted during the Vietnam era and ended up in a band. But in our band, we were a concert band, we were a jazz band, and we marched and did lots of ROTC graduations and basic training graduations. So I marched through 2 years of the Army as well.
Wow. That's incredible. I would kill for a picture of you in a marching band uniform. If you ever dig one up, you have to send it my way.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any of those or not. When I got out of the Army, however, what was worse is I got out of the Army in Fort Ord, California, and that was in Monterey. And so in Monterey, there was a road, very famous road called Cannery Road from the Steinbeck days. So I was playing in a band, and it was kind of a speakeasy band, Roaring Twenties band. They dressed me up in a Superman costume. So I hope all of those pictures are gone too. But I would play, fast, ridiculous drum set solos and run over the vibraphone or xylophone, play fast solos and so on, part of this speakeasy.
What were the other members of the band wearing?
Oh, just crazy costumes. But mine was the worst.
Yours was Superman.
Yeah.
That's really funny, man. That's cool. This was so stupid. I did one gig. It was like the most vague corporate thing I could ever imagine. The whole time we were there, we couldn't figure out what we were at. It was some sort of franchise broker meeting, and it just seems like that was something like out of a movie. And the gig was a 4-man drum line, and one guy was the drum major, and he had a whistle. And none of them were drummers besides me and another guy. There was a trumpet player playing bass drum. We were just pretending we were a drum line, right? So we played for 30 seconds and then had to stay on the stage while they did this PowerPoint presentation for an hour and a half. We had to stay there. They wanted to just stand like, nutcrackers or something.
Too much. Yeah.
Far too much. And we had a big little plume.
That is a unique gig. Yeah.
Mhm. The drum major guy, I think, had the best gig of all. You know, he didn't even have to play; he had a whistle.
Yeah.
All right. So, what are some of your favorite records, Bob?
Well, I really like all kinds of music. So I could answer that in two ways, is every record is my favorite record. And, there's this story, which Brahms symphony is your favorite? Then the conductor would say it's the one I listened to last. So I think that's true. I like everything. So, I probably have at least a dozen recordings of the Bach sonatas and partitas for unaccompanied violin, because I wanted to see all the different ways that people played those so I could teach them better and know them better myself. When I first started drawing a paycheck, I think I went out and bought 12 recordings of the Rite of Spring so I could hear how all the different timpanists played that and so on. So you know, I don't know what I'm going to do with all my LPs and CDs, but I save a lot of money now listening to YouTube.
Yeah. So, before we were talking about the amount of resources there are, and you saved a lot of money on YouTube, but do you think you get a little more value when you have to pay for the thing?
Well, I won't say because I have to pay for it, but in my opinion, especially with our own CDs, we did about 30 CDs with the McCormick percussion group. When you're making an audio CD, uh, you, you have much more careful mic placement, you have editing, you have mastering. So you are usually getting a much better audio experience with a CD and good headphones. And of course, if somebody has, a huge budget, they can incorporate that into a video and put it on YouTube. But still, in general, I think there's a lot of music to be seen on CD that is not going to be of that high quality on YouTube. So
Mhm.
I still think CDs are very necessary. I still buy them, though perhaps a little less frequency than I used to.
Yeah. I was talking about this with John Riley was on a
Mhm.
couple weeks ago. I used to have a car with a CD player in it, and it held 6 CDs.
Mhm.
And now, they're making cars with no CD player. So
With no CD player,
I,
yeah.
I, it's a little bit harder for me to get music into my DNA than it used to be.
Yeah,
Especially when you have to, like I said, when you have to buy the CD, even if it's a used CD that only costed $1, you still have ownership of it.
that's
And
right.
even though I use Spotify and YouTube every single day, but there's less of a connection there.
Yes,
So that's, something I think about a lot.
absolutely. Yeah. But we live in the right time as far as access to all kinds of recordings.
I'll find myself just scrolling for ages, just not knowing what to pick. Where there's been times where I went to a used record shop and picked something completely random that I'd never heard of, and I would end up liking it.
Oh yeah, I do that a lot too. Yeah. Curiosity is wonderful in the music business. Yeah, that's how we learn things. And so I still subscribe to Gramophone and several of and read the New York Times on Sunday and always looking for new CDs from friends and critics and that kind of thing as well.
Hmm. The problems with the records, at least, are man, they are heavy.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you ever move again, it's not worth investing. But anyway, you got time for two more, Bob?
Sure.
Got two more for you. The first one is my girlfriend's favorite question, so she wants me to ask everybody. What do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh, exactly what I'm doing. I'm very lucky in that sense. I want to be the best musician I can be, and I want to be artistically curious.
Beautiful. I figured that might be what you said.
Huh.
And then this is my favorite question to ask the guest on this particular show. Percussionists tend to be a little rambunctious. So is there any trouble you've ever gotten into in the back of the band room?
Oh, not that I'm going to tell you.
No.
I think you mentioned it in a kind when we were kind of doing the pre work on this, and I just, I don't care what they do as long as they're respectful to the music and themselves and each other. I think that's the important thing. Should have some fun back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not too much fun.
Yep. As long as you're respectful, I think it's fine.
That's beautiful. So thank you so much for sitting down with me, Bob. This has been great, man. And it's awesome to see you, even if it's not face to face.
And it's such a joy to see you. Thank you so much for this opportunity.